I hope this reading relaxes you. This is chapter 31, called, When Are You Going to Stop Talking About That? And I love this chapter just by the title alone already. Anyone who's ever been interested in anything and has desired to share that probably has heard someone say that at some point. Welcome. After the pilgrimage to Lake Mansarovar and Mount Kailash in June 1998, which we read last time, we undertook another Dharma Yatra, a pilgrimage to raise awareness for Dharma across the United States. This time we were accompanied by Amar Das Bapu, an elderly saint and renowned leader from Gujarat, whose love for God made him giddy. I like that. We love a giddy saint. We can hope to be giddy too. He broke into spontaneous, infectious laughter even as he lectured. Well, it's already infectious. Again, I was given the task of speaking at almost every event. By now I had learned some stories from the epics and scriptures I could use to illustrate my points. I also told stories I'd picked up in English books or in the rare, precious moments when Swamiji leaned back in his chair and said, "There once was a king... ... In late summer, we returned to Delhi, where work on the Encyclopedia of Hinduism was in full swing, still headquartered in Columbia, South Carolina, with satellite offices in India, Canada, and England. All were working full tilt. Delhi was the main office for India. The office was in our small Delhi ashram, in a single-story block of rooms that bordered a green garden. There was a satsang hall where each day the priest gave talks on the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, or the Vedas, and where twice a year, during the 9-day celebrations of Navratri, which we had only a few short weeks ago, local women would come and sing from 4 a.m. onwards. Not one among them could carry a tune, but it made no difference. I've always envied the Indians for their absolute lack of self-consciousness about bellowing far out of tune or clapping vigorously to a beat that is not the beat of the song. Whenever I was in Delhi, I was awakened by their devotional screeching. That's right. Devotional screeching. Next to the hall was a small kitchen used only for Pujya Swamiji and the 3 or 4 guests the ashram could accommodate. Adjacent to the kitchen was a line of adjoining rooms. The first, Pujya Swamiji's, was a small bare chamber with simple carpeting on the floor and paintings of Lord Krishna on the walls. At night, the boys would come and roll out a thin mat for Swamiji to sleep on. Each morning, they'd roll it back up again. I wonder if they ever forgot to wait for him to leave his mat before they rolled it back up again, or if one day they rolled him up as like a Swami burrito. Next to Pujya Swamiji's rooms was the guest room with 2 beds and a small table between the beds and an attached bath. Next to that was the office for the Encyclopedia of Hinduism project. Behind those 3 rooms were 3 smaller rooms, Pujya Swamiji's office, a tiny 1-bedroom where I stayed, and the project's computer office. Typically, Pujya Swamiji conducted meetings sitting on the floor of his front room. But when someone couldn't sit on the floor, or when there were lots of files and papers to view, the meeting might take place around the table in his office. Scholars sat, met, read, and corrected entries in the encyclopedia office. I usually worked in the computer room along with the guys inputting corrections and changes using the mammoth computers and saving everything on floppy disks. Anyone remember floppy disks? By the time I was born, I think we had switched to not so floppy disks. One afternoon, I walked from the computer office to the kitchen to refill my water glass. Pujya Swamiji was sitting at his desk, immersed in files relating to 11 schools we'd recently adopted in Gurgaon and an upcoming multidisciplinary medical camp at Parmarth. As I walked by his desk, I quietly picked up his empty water glass so I could refill it, along with my own, in the kitchen. "We will go to Gurgaon tomorrow," he said without looking up from his desk. "There is a meeting at 10 o'clock. Matt still has floppy disks, wow. And what's on them? Probably not much. They don't hold very much. Only a few kilobytes at most, probably. Which is what? A very small single file? Or some PDFs? Some programs? You remember floppy disks, Jai? Now we just have, we have them immortalized in our save icon. Doom is one you know you have still. Oh yes, that'll fit. That'll fit on just about anything. Gurgaon is now a metropolis, home to the best hospital in India, the largest hotels and shopping malls, sprawling housing complex that are like entire cities. 25 years ago, it was a slum. After our first visit in August 1997, I wrote in my journal, "The laundry lines hang low, and clothes are draped a few feet above the dirt. Goats, mangy, I don't know what this means. Goats, mangy, and not much more than skin and bones, sleep piled on top of one another. A dog barks in the background, although the cry sounds more like that of a child. Occasionally, a cow will wander lazily to the laundry lines to make lunch out of the drying clothes. Children run and chase each other, like children everywhere. However, these children are half naked, and it's December. Infections cover their bodies, and they are hungry. Here, a room has been built out of scraps of wood, sheets of metal, and clothes that have finally been discarded. The room has no light other than the sun rays that trickle in from the narrow doorway or the holes in the imperfect walls. The floor is damp, as it has been recently raining, but none of the children seem to mind, even though many are without pants. Outside the doorway of this ramshackle room, the shoes of those fortunate enough to own a pair lay neatly in rows. In India, you always remove your shoes before entering a holy place, and to these children, this shack that serves as a school is a temple. At the front of the room, a maximum of 10 feet by 10 feet, stands a young girl, perhaps 6 years old. Her eyes are closed, her hands are in prayer. She says a verse, and the rows of children at her feet repeat it back to her. Those on the floor are in 3 rows, 9 or 10 children per row. All are sitting cross-legged, arms stretched out on their knees, thumbs touching the first 2 fingers, the classic meditation posture. As the morning prayer ends, the young girl's voice breaks into an exhilarated cry. Bharat Mata Ki Jaya! The children shout, glory to her, eyes opening and filling the room with their innocent sweetness. Then she calls, Desh ki seva kaun karega? Who will selflessly serve the people? Hum karengai, hum karengai. We will, comes the exuberant response from the children, filled with angelic optimism and faith. Hum karengai. Here are the children with nothing vowing to give to others. Sorry, let me redo that with some different emphasis. Here are the children with nothing, vowing to give to others. Children the world has forgotten, joyfully, gleefully pledging to serve that very world. Matt, you have a pitch for me reading the encyclopedia on my live. You think it would be amazing? The encyclopedia of Hinduism? I think that would be interesting. I would be interested in that anyway. But I imagine it might read like a dictionary. Oh, and don't cry, Swamiji said as an afterthought, still without raising his head from his desk as I walked into the kitchen. I had been able to control myself during the first visit, a year earlier, shutting off the part of me that feels deeply while we surveyed roofs, floors, and walls for renovating the slum schools, and handed out fruit and cookies to the children. But on the car ride back, I cried non-stop. Not the soft, gentle tears expected when one comes to face with abject suffering, but near hysterical, breath-stealing, uncontrollable sobs. It was hours before the tears subsided. That too only with Swamiji's intervention. When we arrived back at the ashram, after visiting the 11 schools, that first night I couldn't eat dinner. Those kids haven't had dinner, I wailed. They won't have blankets tonight. How can I eat? Swamiji looked straight at me, unmoving, while rivers of tears streamed down my face. Finally, he asked, matter-of-factly, "Are your tears helping them?" "No, but, oh my God, I can't stop crying, Swamiji. It's so unjust, so horrible." He continued to look at me. He didn't reach out a hand to comfort me or say anything soothing. He just watched. Finally, he said, "Your tears are only helping your ego. You think, oh, I'm so compassionate and caring. I am so upset. I can't even eat my dinner. But your tears are not giving food or shelter or an education to those children. No one benefits except your ego. If you really want to help the children, eat your dinner, sleep early, and get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning and figure out how to raise enough money to sponsor all 11 schools." That had been a year earlier. Since then, we had raised the money and adopted the schools. We had built roofs and floors and proper walls, supplied books and other school supplies, and taken over paying the teachers' salaries. I filled our glasses with water and I walked back to Swamiji's desk. As I put his glass on the desk in front of him, I said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine. I was just overwhelmed the first time to see such suffering and pain. As an abuse survivor myself, I tend to identify so much with other children suffering." I walked back toward the encyclopedia office, my water glass in hand, and I heard him ask behind me, "When are you going to stop talking about that?" I turned. He had not lifted his head from the desk. "What?" I whispered. unsure I'd heard him properly. When are you going to stop talking about that? The abuse. It had been nearly 2 years since I had arrived in India. Nearly 2 years since I had stood knee-deep in Ganga and, with the moonlight reflecting in her rushing waters, given her my pain. For the first several months I had searched for it. I had done whatever I could to try to trigger the suffering I'd become accustomed to. I had tried to trigger feelings of being a victim, a child, small and helpless. I had tried to trigger feelings of abandonment to pull forth tears, and they hadn't been there. There had been no memory, image, nothing I could pull forth that triggered the pain, fear, longing, and vomiting I'd been habituated to, as she had bulimia. Ganga had taken them. I was free. I had not vomited or dissociated once. Yet, it was clearly ingrained in my identity. I was present even at this moment when my childhood was far from my mind, a moment when I was happily walking back to work, focused on the schools, women's centers, and medical camps, along with my first editing job, an encyclopedia on the teachings of the mother of the Aurobindo ashram. I was not rehashing or wallowing in my past. I wasn't suffering from it or affected by it in any conscious way. Yet, it was still a deeply present part of my identity. I stared at Pujya Swamiji. He continued to write notes in his small pad, one of dozens he carried around with him, filled with perfectly organized notes on each project, each place. He had asked a simple, matter-of-fact question. It had no more emotional effect than a query about who was coming to meet him tonight or what time we'd leave in the morning. It was process and form, not content. I was free, by grace, from the cellular suffering, from the identification that smothered my heart and my lungs, rendering me breathless. I was free of the content, the inner knowing, the inner awareness. The inner experience of self was free from what had happened 2 decades earlier. But in form, my habits of speech, and my unconscious, involuntary, casual identification, I still had abuse survivor written all over me. Swamiji, I said, and was about to jump back into the worn-out costume and role I knew so well. Swamiji, I repeated, and almost began to recite the lines of the drama and turn his small room in Delhi into the stage of my childhood. And then I stopped before saying the next word. Something inside felt forced, unreal, scripted by someone else. The set of the stage seemed 2-dimensional rather than 3. Unconsciously, I was erecting thin, flat fronts of the past on the stage of my present, trying to squeeze into a costume I had long since outgrown, to say words that were no longer my own. Although I tried to get back in character, to be outraged at the callousness with which he had referred to, the very real pain of my childhood, it didn't work. I couldn't squeeze into the costume or remember the lines of the script. I couldn't generate any genuine feeling of hurt, neither at what had happened nor at my guru for speaking about it so callously. He knew, I realized much later, that it was no longer part of my present existence. There was no I in that sweltering room in South Delhi in 1998 who had been abused, no I who had been abandoned, no I who was the victim. There wasn't one cell of my body that stood, steel glass of water in hand, that had even laid eyes on the monster of my memories. Scientists tell us that the cells of our body regenerate quickly. Skin cells slough off every few days. Organs take longer. Within 7 or 8 years, every single cell of the body has regenerated. I, quote unquote, had been abused. Who? Which I? Certainly not the I who stood before him, not the 27-year-old. A young girl had been abused and abandoned, but that girl was no longer here. She was not the I who stood before her guru on a sweltering September 1998 day in New Delhi. I could no longer squeeze into her clothes or speak her lines convincingly. I could no longer play her on the stage of my life. Now, I think, Swamiji, I said, finally answering his original question. Yes, now I would stop talking about it, because it was not the truth of my present moment. It was a vestige of the past that I carried around in a suitcase that I never let out of sight. All the clothes, makeup, and script of the identity were heavy, but had until then seemed to be crucial luggage for my journey through life. But in that moment, he gave me the opportunity not only to be free on the deep, emotional, psychological level, not just a freedom of content, but also to be free in process and form. There was no need to carry around the old suitcase of clothes that no longer fit. In that moment, as the summer sweat ran down my scalp onto my face, as the heat drew the water from my cells in the streaming river of perspiration, caked on makeup of roles played long ago was finally washed clean. I picked up a washcloth from my bed in the tiny room on my way to the encyclopedia office and wiped my face dry. That was chapter 31. When are you going to stop talking about that? An instruction that can really only be given by a guru. We'll pause our reading there and continue next time. Namaste.